Hey guys, Chaim here, overlooking some vineyards in Judea and Samaria, the heartland of Israel, where 83% of the Bible happened. Of course, leading a destiny experience right now here in what's called a settlement, overlooking what's called a refugee camp. But what are all these terms? What's going on here, you know? What is this whole conflict? What's with this whole separation here in this land of Israel, in the heartland of Israel? Well, we have to go back to two things. One is Tapu. The second is the Sykes-Picot Agreement. I want to start with Tapu. Just as a little bit of a history to understand. In 1831, there was a leader called Muhammad Ali Pasha, a governor in Egypt who wanted to do this whole nationalism move. So he went against the Ottoman Empire. He's like, no, nations. We're going to, me and my son Ibrahim, we're going to assemble an army. We're going to take over Egypt. And he did that, reigned it for 10 years. He ruled Egypt for 10 years. But what happened is that during that reign, he settled some 30,000 people from Egypt and Sudan into the whole Levant area, which we know was later called Palestine, and encouraged farmers to develop their farms and develop a nation. Unfortunately, developing a strong, independent, and larger Egypt wasn't really working well for the European powers. So in 1841, they helped the Ottomans to kick Ali Pasha, to defeat this defector from the Ottomans, and to regain control of the whole Levant. And they made the Ottoman Empire pay a price for their help, obviously. Egypt came under British control. The Ottomans were forced to make reforms in the way that they managed their empire. Some of these reforms is what's called the Tapu, what I told you about. This is what's used in Israel to this day in some ways. Once the Tapu agreement was implemented by the Ottomans, farmers were forced to sell their small patches of land to absentee land owners, and a feudal system was formed, kind of like a duke or an earl who has a property, right? Ottoman land was sold outside of the Ottoman Empire. This was supposed to be forbidden by the Tapu, but in the Ottoman Empire, everything was possible with the help of a little bakshish, right? A little bribery, a little money under the table. And they took advantage of the fact that the empire was no longer restricted just to Muslims. So some of the foreigners bought land in the Levant that were Christian, Europeans, even Germans, even some of the Templars, and set up Templar movements here. But still, it was sold within a land that was on feudalism, right? Like a duke or an earl who has a land and people under him. Several decades before the Zionist movement was even established. The first Jewish settlements that were established were replicas of the European colonies. In fact, the Hebrew name Moshava translates as colony. They were lands that were bought for money. Many times it didn't seem to be a very good deal even. All the paperwork was handled as properly as it could be. All the records were kept as properly as they could keep, because we knew that one day questions would be asked about this purchase. Many hoped for some sort of an autonomy given by the Ottoman Empire, but everything changed when the Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed by England and France in 1917. The purpose of this agreement was to facilitate the partition of the Middle East once it's freed from the Ottoman Empire between the two colonialist states. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was very poorly thought, and its implementation after the World War was even worse. In fact, the blame for all the chaos that we see in the Middle East to this day is really in part because of this Sykes-Picot Agreement. It created conditions that a large wave of immigration came to areas closer to the Mediterranean Sea because they were mostly developed by the British and French. And this is while at the same time national borders were beginning to form inside the area, based on the promise for national independence that the British and French gave to various factions during the war. One of these promises was the Balfour Declaration, right? That Jews would have a homeland here. And these Jews came expecting that that was true, and they would settle in those colonies that were already being established. Especially, they were driven by an impending doom, by rising anti-Semitism, which culminated in the Holocaust. So the Arab landowners in the area started having concerns about their interests and started to incite the population against the Jews, against the British mandate, worried that maybe too many would come and they'd lose their power. And this gradually caused the British to turn back on their promise because they were too worried that the Arabs would be, as an entire Arab pan-Islamic world, would go against the British, and they would lose even what the British had here. The whole Hashemite dynasty was given the areas that became Jordan and that became Haran, which is southwest part of Syria and part of Iraq. Okay, with this state of chaos, the world entered into the Second World War. You have millions of Jews who are desperate to have a Jewish state, as was voted upon both in the League of Nations and in the United Nations, of course also ratified in San Remo with the Allied powers, with the four major powers, that is. What I will say is this: the refugee issue will not be solved by politics. It's time to understand the spiritual parameters of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the eternal promises which are true.
Biblical education and training for Christians around the world, serving the people and land of Israel with unconditional love and an uncompromising faith. Please make your donation today. Your monthly gift is a commitment with us in blessing Israel, blessing God. The Aliyah Return Center.